Hi everybody. This is a video on Instructional Design 101 and fairly similar to the one that I put up in the Google Classroom, but I'm making a new one with Zoom and adding a few other things that I think might be important. So the PowerPoint that's up there in the Google Classroom is the same PowerPoint I'm using for this presentation, but I'm also using some other tools. I am, again, using virtual background because it's nice to use virtual backgrounds because then your students or whoever you're working with can't see your environment, especially if you're working from home or even if you don't want the classroom space to actually be seen when you're recording videos. This is a great way to do that while kind of adding some things. You see I have a babbling brook here in the background. I'm always around nature sounds and water and nature. It's just soothing to me. So, but again, I'm also using my iPad again in Notability. This time I have my iPad directly attached to my MacBook, and I'm going to be using it to demonstrate something when I share my screen. So that's a tool that I'm using for this. And I'm trying to, in these videos, give you some modeling of different technology ways that you can help kids learn through your recordings as well as your live sessions. So once you've figured out the learning destination, it's time to instructionally design. So I'm going to share my screen with you. And what I have up here, I'm going to toggle back and forth between this PowerPoint and the iPad that I have. So I just want to kind of make clear that the stuff that I'm talking about in terms of instructional design is really around foundationally some of the pieces with dimensions of learning. And I wanted to kind of give that framework a little bit as I do this with this video with you, because much of what I talk about is really how are we bringing all the different parts of the brain together and how they work in isolation, but then how do they work in synergy. So the model around dimensions of learning has stood the test of time. It's very research-based. None of it has been disproven because between neuroscience and truly valid and reliable educational research, it's stood the test of time, even though there might be other verbiage and other things that people might be using now in conjunction with this. So in thinking about this in terms of your instructional design, you want to be sure that you're really thinking about the purple first. And so when I start to tell people in terms of planning, you will have your learning destination, but your learning destination has 3 circles, 3 areas in which you're planning to bring those things together in synergy. So the first circle is that habits of mind, and really, you know, you can lump those attitudes and perceptions into that. That purple is all the social emotional learning stuff. So no matter what kinds of resources that you are using, you're probably going to be using, and we are going to be using, a combination of resources that can help us to build out the capacity of our students to have strong habits and positive, productive attitudes and perceptions. That's the gatekeeper of the cognitive system of the brain. And we have to spend a lot of time building up our students in that realm, because the cognitive system can't be reached if the metacognitive and self systems are not strong. So that's the social emotional learning. That's the piece that's so critical to improving the cognitive system, which is the system that we measure. And that's, you know, the thing that's very visible to people, because that's the thing that gets measured quantitatively. But it's actually the higher level reasoning processes, and the most critical reasoning processes lie in this habits of mind realm, in the attitudes and perceptions realm, the metacognitive system and the self system. This purple is higher level reasoning than what's in the cognitive system. It's the gatekeeper. So we have to really spend a lot of time with it. The principles of backwards planning. How do you design the ideal learning experiences? And I would put a caveat here. The ideal learning experiences is the same success criteria, whether you're physically all with the kids, whether you're blended, or whether you're fully remote. There's elements that are the same and that should be done no matter where the conditions are in which you're bringing kids to the learning. So there are those three areas: content, thinking skills, and habits of mind. So here's where I'm kind of going to use my iPad, but I put this up here in this PowerPoint because one of the things that I want people to understand is you do not need to do this high tech. This part of the planning doesn't need to be high tech at all. You know, I've been through a lot of curriculum mapper initiatives, and as a teacher and as a leader. So just, you know, no, I'm not going to do that to you. Okay. We want to make sure that, you know, the learning destinations are clear, and that's a systems approach. But then when you get to planning, I mean, I did all of my planning in little notebooks like this. And now I've kind of gotten really adept with using some other technologies in which I can do the very same thing, only make it digital and be on my computer and in a file. So this is sort of an example of the way that you would make the destination clear. Now, this right here, I would do sort of privately in my notebook first, but then I would be making this really visible in the way that I'm going to do it right now in front of you in my iPad. So I just wanted to, you know, kind of show you that, yes, you kind of do it privately behind the scenes, but then you've got to be really visible. I strongly suggest you read the Susie video, or I mean, watch the Susie video, because she had a student take her phone and video her doing that, making the destination clear with these three circles, this sort of curriculum model of planning, in which she made that very visible to her students live. And it is what everyone should really do. But we also can do this in a video format as well, making it clear that way, and then have students watching it. If we're in the remote, you don't want to take time in a live session to do this, you could do it as a recording. So this just gives you an example. It doesn't have to be pretty, it's for you. And then ultimately you're going to make it visible to the students. So when I bring up, and I'm actually casting my iPad here, and this is Notability again. So you'll be able to see. So if I were to work with students, the first thing that I would do is I would just literally draw out those three circles, okay, leaving my sort of middle here, so that they can see that this middle is the what we're going to be doing, right? So I always tell the students, this is the what we will do. It's the context of which our learning is going to be put into, so that, and that's the ideal learning experience right there. That's the ideal. Okay, but that's not where you start as planning, and that's not where you start with kids necessarily. So the first thing that you might want to show them is, all right, well, what's the content learning? So if I was, you know, I was a science teacher, so I know elementary school teachers, you're going to be annoyed by this, but I'm going to use science because those instructional goals and topics come right to my head, okay? And that's what I put for an example in the slides, right? So, you know, I might not get into this specific instructional goals yet with the students. I might just put topics in here first, just so that they understand that content topic. So what I might do with my students here in front of them is I'm going to say, okay, well, we're going to be studying scientific investigations. And the topic is variables. That's going to be our big topic area. Scientific investigations, variables. So I'm telling them that that's really the content. That's what the understandings are. That's the declarative knowledge. And the skills, the procedural knowledge in content, that's there. So the thinking skills, okay, the thinking that I'm going to ask them to do in this particular topic study is I'm going to ask them to use inquiry reasoning, investigation reasoning, invention reasoning in this topic study. And I'm also going to be working on inductive and deductive reasoning through our our work. And then the habits that we're going to be working on through this topic study is going to be responding to feedback, and I think for this topic study, we're really going to work on perseverance, because perseverance is really important when you are being an inventor or when you're being a scientist. You have a lot of failures before you ever figure something out or discover something. So perseverance and responding to feedback, both are going to be really important in this. Responding to feedback both as a learner, perseverance both as a learner and as a scientist and an inventor. So that's how I would be talking to the students, and I would be literally doing this as I'm doing this in front of you, just like this. So I'm happening to use this. Now, if I were in a live session doing this, I might hook myself up to a technology like this. I'm sharing my screen, and now I'm sharing this out with kids. So then I tell the kids, okay, well, what's the context going to be, right, for this particular set of instructional goals, the thinking, the habits, and the content that we're going to learn, master, and practice and master, right? So this topic study is going to be called, what do you do with a problem? Because how do we solve problems? We inquire, we investigate, we use inductive and deductive reasoning. So this topic study is really, this unit is going to be around how do we solve problems. And within that, and I'm going to be talking to them about that, we're going to learn how to ask really good questions that can be investigated, and we can use a scientific inquiry with, and I didn't put that in the box, but it is scientific inquiry. We're going to really learn how to use inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning to make logical inferences from data that we collect to once we've identified a problem, right? And and we might use invention reasoning, because if our problem can be solved with an invention, then we might do an invention. But maybe there's a problem in which we have to actually use scientific inquiry to really figure out what the problem is and what's causing the problem. And then we might have to invent something, right? So this whole topic study is going to be really exciting, right? Because we're going to do lots of cool things that are very good, and lots of things, the investigations and scientific inquiry that you do, ultimately, you're going to actually design your own. You're going to identify problems and design your own investigations while learning, right, what scientific investigation and inquiry and investigations are, learning all about designing those types of experiments and investigations, and really understanding variables. And then in that context, we're going to really practice and get to know better and have more strategies around responding to feedback and perseverance. So there you go, right? I've literally instructionally designed, and I've done it in front of my students, and then there can be dialogue with them. So if you watch that Susie video that I mentioned, you will see her and the dialogue she's having with students. And you'll notice that with that dialogue, she has an ability to really do a lot of good formative assessment through that process too. So the key to instructional design in this first step is, what is the learning destination, and making that learning destination really clear to your students. That is critical. Then you have to decide which habits of mind you're going to focus in on, and and I showed you the ones that I decided. Now, I just put this slide up here. This happens to be the main cohort for Customized Learning's set of 12 that they decided on for their habits of mind in these 3 strands. We will make that decision as a district, what habits we really want to focus in on that we are going to qualitatively report out on. There's a whole lot of things that we do in the realm of social emotional learning and building up the habits for kids to be successful in their social emotional lives, which ultimately will help them be successful in their academic lives. But we're not going to report out in any fashion many of those things. They'll be part of our culture, protocols and procedures, but they're not going to be things that we're going to put in a reporting structure. So what we decide here is really what's going to be going in the reporting structure. So this is just an example of what the cohorts group of schools decided on. We could use Art Costa's or Stephen Covey's. We can use a combination of that. Plus you've got Carol Dweck's work, plus you've got Kaysel's work, that there's some good things in there. So we may end up doing a combination of things, which is fine, or adopting a set. So that'll be a power vote. We've heard me talk about this before. So once you've done that instructional design piece, that planning out in those sort of 3 buckets, and you've decided on your thinking skills. So you'll notice that I chose experimental inquiry for it, invention reasoning, inductive and deductive reasoning as well. Okay, so, and ultimately, I probably would get to analyzing errors in reasoning as well in this particular topic study, though I didn't put it in there, but I might add it at some point if I had time, or then maybe in my next topic study, that might be the focus too. So just know that this is the taxonomy that we'll use to make those decisions. So you can do that now. These are the 19 reasoning processes. And I've said this in the learning progression video, and I'll say it here. This is the same reasoning processes that's in Webb's Depths of Knowledge or Bloom's Taxonomy. It's just in a chart that I think is easier to follow and read and gives us some better guidance on what kids are doing or what we're doing, anybody's doing when they're using these reasoning processes. And it'll help us to teach to them explicitly more effectively. So then you'll notice that then I chose some scales that would go with this unit, and I filled in the body of evidence of things that the students were going to be doing to collect evidence of their learning for this particular instructional goal. This is one of them. There's about 5 scales in this particular topic study that I would have pulled and chosen. And some of these assessments are for all of them at once, and some of them are individual to that specific instructional goal. So, and I would tell students, you know, that's this body of evidence is that middle circle. That's what the content, thinking skills, and habits are feeding into. I'm going to have them do these things to practice and master those instructional goals. And you'll notice what I did when I modeled that. I didn't get into these individual instructional goals because as I get into the topic studies, some of my kiddos might actually already know how or be skilled at qualitative and quantitative observation. So I may not need to have them work on that, do direct instruction with them on that. I'm just going to pop them into using it in a higher level instructional goal or task. So you know, I will do pre-assessment when I start with the kids to know which instructional goals within those topics that I really need to work on with individual students. And then some would be for every kid. So I would do that pre-assessment to get that data to know that for sure. So the second step is to think about your delivery, right? What's the delivery of, you know, what is the delivery, okay? So the next thing that I want to do is I want to think, okay, well, I have these, my topic, my, you know, my thinking skills that I'm focusing in on, my habits that I'm focusing in on. So now I got to think about how am I going to break this into digestible bites so that I can then put this into modules. Now, what I suggest to you is that you're building, you sketch it out, right, on, you know, a notebook or a piece of scrap paper if you want to, just so you have a visual in your mind. You don't really need templates for this. You just need a notebook and a process, right? And so you'll see in this picture that I've shown you is all I'm doing is I'm just simply going through and making a decision on the digestible bites, the chunks that I want to put this in so that I can, you know, break up that instruction and evidence collection that are digestible, interactive, and engaging. And so the questions those are the questions I ask myself. How will I provide choice and voice within these modules? And what will be my formative and summative assessment strategies? So I'm literally getting this kind of laid out, you know, and you could mind map it out if you wanted to. You could do it like this. I'm showing you in that picture. It just simply is a way for you to just do some thinking. And so what I would do in Google Classroom once I sketched this out is I would literally go into Google Classroom and I would put those topics in that make those topics and get them in the order that I wanted them. Because once they're in there and they're in the order that I want them, now I can start putting in the instructional tasks and the assessment tasks that I want them to do within those modules and in what order. And always making sure that, you know, there's a flow. Now, for those of you that are elementary school teachers, you may want to think about things in terms of week-long themes, maybe, that are integrated. So this is more for someone who, like for me, I taught one subject area basically. When I was doing this. So I, you know, had the one. And so I could design in my learning management system things this way. But for you teaching multiple subjects, you might want to make it more digestible, themed, and integrated. But the process would be the same. It's just that maybe yours would be, you know, weeks with a theme topic. And then, you know, everything stays in order by when it occurred. That might be helpful for the kids and families at that age level. So it's the step 2 is the instructional delivery and evidence collection planning, and then in tandem using your Google Classroom to put this in, right? That's where your principals and everybody see it visual and professional anyway. So what you do behind the scenes in your process in a scrap paper or on an iPad like I was doing there, that's yours. It's going to be very visible to people how well you planned when you build out your Google Classroom from your little notebook sketches. So the third step is then to design the engaging learning tasks. How will I create the conditions for intrinsic motivation? That needs to be sort of your big question as you think about this. What tasks will you have learners complete? What formative assessment strategies will be embedded throughout? What processes and protocols will be in place for the learners to keep track of their own learning and be reflecting always through this thing. So as you design these tasks in the modules, there's some things in the recipe that you want. You want the hook, right? And if you kind of think about, you know, sort of that hook piece, how we like, is it a video? Is it a, you know, to get them sort of inspired around what they're doing that week? You should have your instructional videos, your asynchronous pieces. If you're pouring information or trying to give information to students, you just make a video to do that, or find a video, instructional video on that particular instructional goal or topic or content that you want them to assimilate and acquire and integrate. That doesn't need to be in a live session. So that's the other piece of thinking about, you know, your planning, your designing engaging learning tasks. You want to think about what can be asynchronous that you build out really right within that Google Classroom, and then what is live, because the live session should be where you are doing much higher levels of reasoning. It's not where you're telling kids anything other than maybe giving them some directions to then go into a breakout room and do a task with their peers, right? It's giving them the ability to practice and think with the information that they've acquired and integrated. So when you're thinking about instruction, you want to initially in your live sessions really give your students some strong modeling around strategies for acquiring and integrating declarative and procedural knowledge. Because once they've got those strategies, they'll do much better in the asynchronous stuff that you have them do. So you want to think about that in your planning in this designing engaging learning tasks. Because what they come to you physically to do in the physical classroom, if they're with you live physically or in a live session, it's you're going to ask them to think with at higher levels with that acquired and integrated knowledge. So then I would, as you can see, just sketching out the types of tasks that I'm going to have them do. Some of them are repetitive and part of a, like for me, a science notebook setup. And I strongly suggest you have students have interactive thinking notebooks. I put up some resources in the Google Classroom around that you may want to take a look at. So what I would do from here, and I'm going to kind of go through these and then I'm going to show my iPad again, because one of the things that you want to do is you want to think about all right, well, what are the learning spaces for ideal experiences? And there's three, and they happen both whether you're remote or whether the kids are with you physically. So campfire time. Campfire time is the learning from the expert or storyteller in a more formal setting. So this is your whole group instruction. Who might be the experts internally and externally? How would you structure and allow for experts? So don't forget that students are experts in their own experiences, and they can be leading campfire time, right? So campfire time is led by anybody, right? It's not always led by you. But that's where a person, an expert, a presenter is leading the group. Everybody's together. Campfire time. And by the way, I got these from students at the center, Personalized Learning with Habits in Mind by Zumba and Kalik. Really great book if you haven't gotten a chance to look at that one. So the watering hole time, small group discourse and collaborations. So what might the watering hole look like in your classroom? So at this point, as I'm thinking about campfire, watering hole, and then and this is where kids, because remember, learning is social. They've got to be doing group work often. Group work is not graded. It's collaborative time for during the learning, right? It's where they practice things, they dialogue, they think critically together. And you can do this both in the physical room where our kids are physically in groups, or you can do them digitally in breakout rooms in Zoom or Google Meets. Google Meets will have them eventually. And then cave time. So the cave time is that individual study, reflection, and development. How will you provide time and strategies for cave time? You have to have this cave time. People have to go internal and process individually and reflect and make meaning of. So cave time is really important. So when you think about these three things, what I suggest you do, okay, is to kind of take, again, a piece of paper, notebook, and I would say, all right, well, I would put up at the top of the, the page, campfire time. And then I'd make myself a T-chart. And I'd simply say live, in person, okay, or in person, okay, digital live, I should put that, digital live, in person, what does that look like? And then, or actually, you know what, that's not how I want this T-chart to look, actually. I want it to be, what does this look like when I make this T-chart? I want it to be in person, like they're in the classroom with you. What does it look like? And live digital sessions. What does it look like? Okay, and so I'd start making the list. Okay, and so sometimes campfire time might not be live either. So sometimes it might be an asynchronous video as campfire time, right? Could be, but really campfire time is where the kids are learning from an expert, but they're able to discuss as a group, ask questions as a group. When they're hearing questions, good questions, and getting those answers, and that's modeled for them, that's really important. So you could do that actually asynchronously by having a video and then having a question blog underneath it where kids are posting and then responding to other people's posts. So you could kind of frame that asynchronously too. But again, you want to think about campfire time, in person, what does that look like? What does it look like live? Okay, then I would do the same thing with watering hole time, right? What does that look like? So watering hole, put it up there, make my T-chart, okay? In person, what does that look like? Live, digital, what does that look like? Okay, so I might, might be where I have the breakout rooms. I can still do group work, right? But when they're physically with me, okay, I have breakout tables, right? And, socially distanced, right? So you get the idea. So that's, kind of thinking through, and doing that thinking is really, really important. because you want to have that sort of framed out in your mind as you're building out your Google Classroom and sort of sketching out your plan. And again, you can sketch out your plan for this right in your little notebook. You can, you know, as you begin to plan some of your topic studies, you'll write your, you know, high level questions down in there, and that'll just be open for you, just like it would be if you had it sitting, you know, on the table and alive in person, and you'll have them there digitally. Same process. So step 4 is the assessment test. How will you know your impact? We really have to work hard on this one, harder maybe than we have before, because I think, you know, we have to really be clear about what high quality assessments are, both summative and formative. And remember, far more formative than summative. So have you designed high quality assessments? So in the module, I've given you some criteria for high quality assessments, a nice little visual from Rick Stiggins around that. You probably want to take a look at it and really reflect on the assessments you have now and what you might choose or build in the future. Do the assessments tell you your instruction was successful and let the learners know that what their next steps are in learning? Is there clear success criteria for assessment tasks? Have you set that with the students? Again, there's another nice little video and some resources in there around setting and using criteria with students, which really you should do. Are there samples of what success looks like available to the learners? In the setting and using criterion process, you bring samples to the table and have them unpack them and create success criteria, which is super helpful to the students. Are the assessments clearly connected to the topics and instructional goals? Right? So those are the real reflective questions you ask yourself in step 4. Now, again, I could set and use criteria digitally, just like I am right now with sharing my iPad. I can have kids looking at samples digitally and then putting in the chat or putting it on a shared Google Doc or sharing things out verbally, and I can write them down on my little iPad right in front of them in Notability as I'm hearing the criteria. So you'll see how to set and use criteria with students in that video. I'm not going to do that here, but again, very important, this step 4. So thinking, you know, always, how will you know they have learned? What is the evidence? Jerry Maguire it. Show me the proof. So step 5, communicating about learning. How will the learners organize their evidence, reflect, and communicate about their learning to others? We don't do nearly enough with this with our students. We as adults often are doing a lot of the communicating, and students are not doing the communicating, and they really need to be very highly involved in the communication of their learning. And we would have a whole lot less stressed out parents if the students were really in charge of that more. So it's critical to have a structure for learners to show their process of learning. That's why progress folios and portfolios are important to be established as a part of a routine of their learning journey. And so there's a little module in my Google Classroom around that too with some ideas, so you might want to check that out. But I definitely strongly suggest that this step 5 you don't skip. You set that up right in the beginning of the year with students so that they really have a clear structure for reflection and collection of evidence. So I've also put up here some success criteria for you in terms of instructional design and the clear 5 major pieces of what needs to happen within it, and then the details and specifics for that. So this might be something that you might want to just print off and have as you kind of reflect and assess on your own practices. This is probably a good thing to have. So to sum up this process, remember that you're always starting with the destination of learning, then you build the roadmap for your learners to travel on and provide them with the finish line, and finally a place to reflect and celebrate for their learning journey. That's really what you're doing when you really well design instructional, when you do really good instructional design there. Let's spit that out. So think about learning as always a journey. We never end learning. If we stop learning, we're not alive anymore, right? So that's a really important piece to kind of think about as you move forward. So that's really the nutshell of instructional design. And you'll notice that I kept you in some super simple super simple ways to frame that for yourself. So don't spend a lot of time trying to like type everything up in templates, or, what I just showed you, I think is the simplest way to go, because you're going to make everything digital and alive when you build out your ideas in that Google Classroom framework. So have fun with it, and as you're building, just always thinking, how am I balancing the digital world with the physical world? And if I have to go fully remote, right, how am I going from in person to instruction when I'm in person having the kids all in the classroom versus having to then shift into live sessions? It shouldn't be that you're doing necessarily different things. It's just that you're moving it into a digital platform. So keep that in mind as you're planning. You're trying to make sure that you're well set up to blend learning, use technology as for what it's really useful for, and as your partner in crime in teaching and structure. And then, don't make things that don't need to be complex. And really just think about, how do I get my kids intrinsically motivated through the experiences that I facilitate them through, so that they stay focused in on learning and stay highly engaged and motivated. So that's all, folks, for this video. And again, I have lots of resources and ideas. So if you want help, you want to brainstorm, we can do that too. And we'll have more PD around this as well.